everybody, to Redemption City Stories. And so glad today to have Kevin and Suzie Rodgers. You'll hear from them in just a minute. The idea of the podcast was all the time we'll have coffee and lunch with people and think, I wish our whole church would have just heard what you said. I wish that the whole church would have heard what you just mentioned. And so that's the idea, you know. And so Suzie, we've never really gotten much time together. I've had lunch with you. But so, you know, we're just ready to kind of share with our church who y'all are. And so, and of course, love the co-host, almost Dr. Chris Wright. Maybe at this point,
maybe
when this is released.
When it's released.
Yeah, he's almost there.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Getting close.
Don't be intimidated.
Congratulations.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, he's been working hard at it. So, so Kevin, if you could go first, you know, who are y'all and, you know, who are Kevin and Suzie Rodgers?
We are Kevin and Suzie Rodgers.
And tell us about your family.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. When people ask you that, I mean, we're believers, so we'll start with
right.
Jesus.
There you go.
That's got
It's a
that.
great start.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're both believers, which is a whole nother story. And we are from North Carolina originally.
What part?
Well, I'm from a little town called Oriental on the coast, and she's from Burlington,
Of course.
where the mill outlets are, of course. And so it's a long story, which I'm sure we'll end up telling you. But that's where we're from. We spent a long time, half our lives overseas with the IMB in sub-Saharan Africa, and then out of nowhere, God just said, "Hey, it's time to move to Fort Worth." And so now I'm a professor at Southwestern.
Yeah.
Professor of missions.
Professor of missions.
Yep. Have
Suzie,
3 kids.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So tell us about your kids.
Yes, we have 3 kids. Our oldest is 33, and he lives in North Carolina, and he's married and has our 3 grandsons. So one is 6, one is 2, and one is like 2 months now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
so pretty exciting to have grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
And then our middle son his name is Justin, and he is 30, and he's in Louisville. He works for American Airlines as a mechanic. And then our daughter and her husband live in Norway, Oslo, Norway.
Okay.
Mhm. They are missionaries with the IMB. They went this past September. So they're doing the Journeyman program.
How's that going so far?
Good.
Good.
Everything's going good.
Yeah, we're going to see him in July.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Great.
Never
Well, you're
been to
more than
Norway.
welcome to go.
So your son who has the grandsons in North Carolina, where are they?
In Raleigh.
Right. Okay. So I say early, I do know where Oriental is actually. So we lived in Asheville for almost
wow.
5 years.
Okay.
And had a son born there. So we got a couple North Carolina things going. So there's so many. So many things we need to get into. So let's start with how'd y'all meet? How did the romance begin here?
You want to tell that story?
Yeah, this is the
can
story,
tell.
Kevin, you told me at lunch when we first got to meet. And it was that same thing Matt just said. I said, if we would have been recording this, it would have been a really cool story.
So
for
you
our
need to
people
tell
hear.
it.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's hear it.
All right. So I wasn't really raised in a Christian home. I mean, we went to, I know I'm starting back when I was born a baby. I'm going. Anyway, yeah, no. So I wasn't really raised in a Christian home. But my mom, I'm not sure if she's a believer or not, but she took us to Methodist church, kind of grew up in a Methodist church. When I was 12 years old, I got sprinkled and joined the church, but never really heard the gospel, didn't know anything about Jesus. Not really. Went through confirmation classes, did the whole thing, but don't really remember that. Not criticizing that church. Maybe they did, but from my memory as a 12-year-old, I don't think so. So I got steadily worse and more wicked and ungodly as time went on. This is back in the 80s. Okay, I'm kind of an old guy. And so, I'm in high school. Well, actually, 1984, graduate from high school.
I was born in '84.
Okay. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
that. That'll stay with me the rest of the day. And and I was a senior in high school and metalhead, headbanger, long hair, the whole thing. And
I did not see that coming.
and all-
That's great.
all that comes with that. Okay. Worse than Ted Cable ever thought he was.
Yeah, so I'm picturing,
honestly.
yeah.
And so anyway, I was going to college, and there's a whole other story there. We were supposed to go to military academy. That didn't happen. Thank the Lord. Ended up at UNC Wilmington. And Suzie was a 16-year-old, or she was saved when she was 16, I think, if I can tell your story, and in a Baptist church, Southern Baptist church, but she was kind of a backslidden Baptist and not doing what she should do. And we met as freshmen at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. We actually lived in the same dorm, as risque as that sounds. It was a co-ed floor, And so what happened was, I'm telling you everything in one long story. I hope you're good. So what happened was I was miserable, and I didn't know it was because I needed Jesus. I just knew I was miserable and just unhappy and all kinds of bad things in my life, drugs, alcohol, stuff like that. So I just decided, you know what the real issue is? I need a girlfriend. If I had a girlfriend, that would be actually, that would solve everything. So what I did was I said, well, I'm on this co-ed dorm. The first floor was guys and second floor girls and like that, guys and girls. And so I said, I'm going to walk up this, I'm going to put on my best, Billy Idol glove and my best spandex shirt. This is
that was sleeveless, if I remember right.
Spandex shirt. This is the
a couple of sprays of cologne, maybe.
That's exactly right. Spike my hair good.
There you go.
And I'm going to walk up this co-ed dorm, and the first good-looking girl I see, that's who I'm going to go. That's how arrogant I was. That's how absolutely arrogant I was. And so sure enough, I walk on the second floor, and Susie's coming out of her dorm room going to the bathroom.
She was.
And I had met her at a party like maybe that week sometime, and we were in a class, an oceanography class. This is a ocean school, a beach school. That's why I was there, because I surfed, and it was a party school, so that's why I was there. I don't know why she was there, but that's why I was there. And so I saw her come out of her dorm room, and I was like, okay, that's the one. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to make this happen. So I did, man. I got to be friends with her. She was dating some guy from Carolina, and I don't know if you know enough about North Carolina to know I'm a Duke fan. Anybody but Carolina, okay? Not gonna. Which, by the way, I'm pulling for the Mavericks to get the
Cooper Flag. We need him.
Flag. I don't know.
My first time preaching in North Carolina, I made a Duke versus North Carolina joke, and Duke was the butt of the joke. And there were people that never forgave me for it. I'm not kidding. Sure. They didn't think it was funny. They never thought it was funny.
I'm sure.
They never thought anything I ever said again was funny.
So anyway, she was dating a guy. He was going to Carolina, and this is before even the interstate didn't go all the way to Wilmington. So I mean, there was no cell phones. There was nothing. You had to go to a payphone to use the phone. Handwritten letters. So I knew Chapel Hill was 4 hours away from Wilmington, but it might as well have been 4 days from Wilmington in those days. So I did. I just kind of bided my time. I got to be really good friends with her, and just, we were in the class together, got to meet her. And sure enough, later, about 6 months later, they broke up, and there I was, right
he
place
swooped
at the
right
right
in.
time.
He was ready.
Swooped in, and we started dating. And I just was so in love with her. I don't know how she felt, but I was just head over heels in love with this girl. And then something crazy happened. Now, my life was still not going great, but she was everything. So then I, got in just not miserable, not happy. And so she started getting involved with there was a girl that was a friend there of hers, and her name was Kim Freeman, I think. It was K-Part now, but Kim Freeman. And Kim was a believer. We didn't know that at the time, but Kim was a believer and involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, if you've know Cru or heard of Cru. So anyway, we kept working. We kept going to class together, and Kim befriended Suzie and kind of had marked Suzie out that she was gonna, she was trying to share the gospel with her. Actually, is what she was doing. And Suzie was a believer, but kind of not, a nominal Christian. Got involved in Crusade, and I could just see her slowly kind of drifting away from me. And that really bugged me. I actually had a confrontational episode with Kim that I'm very embarrassed about later in life. But I could just tell that she was drifting away. And so anyway, long story short, we go home for Christmas break. We come back, spring break happens. And, it takes time for grades to show up in the mail when they mail them out after the first semester, snail mail. And so we go home for spring break, and Suzie was going to Operation Sunshine with Campus Crusade, Daytona Beach, Florida. And basically you learn how to share your faith there, and you're witnessing people on spring break. And I went home with my parents. And when I got home with my parents, they got the grades in the mail. And I had made a 0.5 GPA for that first semester.
A little bit low.
It's a little bit. That's a little bit low. I made
Dr. Kevin Rodgers.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's fast forward.
I made a D in English, which ended up majoring in English, and I got a B in golf PE. That was where the .5
But an A
came
in
from.
partying, maybe?
Yeah, that was
Yes,
the whole thing.
definitely.
So I would be out all night and then sleep through my morning classes, and after so many cuts, you get a letter grade loss, whatever. That's what happened. So,
so
my
It's
mother.
this is a great comeback story, by the way.
It's a great comeback
From
story.
0.5 to Dr. Kevin Wright.
Yeah,
that's right.
So my mom was a high school math teacher forever. My dad went to college late in life because he went in the Navy first. They were big on education.
Sure.
So when I was home for spring break and they saw those grades, they were just horrified. And they said, "That's it. You're not going back. You're actually going in the military." And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not either. We done crossed that bridge. I'm not going to do that." They were like, no, you're going back. And I was like, no, I'm going. Now, my mom would deny this story today. It's not her perception. I don't know really what happened. I'm telling you my perception. But I felt like my parents said, look, I said, I'm going back to college. And I was going back because of her. And they said, if you go back to college, then don't come home. And I was like, fine. So I packed up my little 1974 Toyota Corona
There you go.
that I had mowed lawns and paid $300 for. Okay, believe it or not, that's how old I am. And I packed all that up with all my stuff, and I drove back to UNC Wilmington to the one thing that was good in my life, and that was Suzie. So I get there, she shows up, and we meet, and we hug and talk, whatever. And she pretty much, maybe not the first thing, but pretty much says, so look, here's the thing. While I was in Daytona Beach, I've rededicated my life to the Lord, and Jesus is most important to me, and so we can't date anymore. We're not going to be together. And I was like,
Because obviously Jesus is not very important to you.
well,
That's
obviously,
yeah.
yeah, totally. I mean, and I was just like stunned by that, shocked by that. I probably did, God, how arrogant I was. I probably did something like, what means so much to you that you would break up with this? That's probably what I said. I don't know what I said, but something like that. But then, and I mean, this is where we will come to this. But as cheesy as I'm pointing to the Kleenex, by the way, as cheesy as it sounds, she pulled out a little 4 spiritual laws and shared the gospel with me. Okay. I'd never heard the gospel before.
Yeah.
And because I could see something had changed in her life. It was just obvious. You could just see the countenance of the Lord on her face. She was glowing. There was something significantly different about her. And I could tell she had changed. I could tell it was real. Mm-hmm. And I could tell that she was serious. I knew she loved me. And not that I'm all that, but I just thought, I just can't believe that I've given up everything. I've basically left home. I don't have anything. I was on academic probation because of my financial, because I was putting my way through school. So financial probation, because of student finances and everything. My life was basically falling apart. She was the one good thing, and now she's leaving. And so she share the gospel with me. I took that tract back to my dorm room on the first floor of that dorm, and I just read it over and over and over again. About 2 or 3 days later, I gave my life to Christ. And I went and told her, and you know what? She didn't get back with me because she's smart, right? Mm-hmm. She was like, yeah, let's just see. We didn't get back together right away. But I just got involved with Campus Crusade. Somebody, a guy named Rick Amos, he mentored me, discipled me, and taught me how to share my faith, taught me how to study the Word of God. I learned how to teach other people the Bible, led a Bible study, was in a Bible study, learned how to share my faith, started getting involved in Campus Crusade. This is my freshman year, so from then on, we ended up getting back together, dated all through college, and then after college we got married, and then the rest is history. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I'll stop there. Anything you want to add?
No, you did good.
What do you remember about the moment when he comes back and you go, hey, good to see you, hear the 4 spiritual, what do you remember about?
Well, the big thing that I remember is I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I needed to break up with him because I knew that I was going to start living for God, and he wasn't, and I just felt like it's not going to work in the long run, so I might as well just break up with him now. So I don't remember you telling me the whole story about your grades and your parents at that moment.
I did. I don't
but
think I did.
Another thing that stands out to me is he said, "What? I can tell something has changed in your life. Tell me what that is." Well, the first thing I knew it was Jesus and that I had rededicated my life to the Lord. But and I had that track with me, but I had just learned how to share it.
Right.
And so I thought, well, it's probably better if a guy goes and shares the gospel with him. So I went to get a friend, another guy, to go share with Kevin. And he told me, he said, no, it was Todd. Oh, wow. But anyway, he said, no, Suzie, you just learned how to share your faith. You go and share. So I went back, and just like Kevin says, it was kind of cheesy, and I did not do very well, but I just read that booklet pretty much to him. Mm-hmm. And then, but that just shows us that it's not in our words or what we say or anything, but it's just God's work, God's Holy Spirit that works in the lives of people to change their hearts. And so, like Kevin said, it was a few days later where he decided to give his life to God.
Wow, and it's striking too. I mean, here you are, a couple of Bible Belt kids.
Mm-hmm.
Grew up in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. My brother-in-law has a similar. My sister's husband has a similar story. Grew up in Plano, Texas, never heard the gospel until he was in his 20s, and it's part of the reason we planted here. There's this. So you had heard the gospel, but you needed renewal in college.
Yes.
And you'd been around it. Who knows if it had ever been shared around you? But that's striking.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Let me say something about that too, Matt. I went to a Baptist church from the time I was a baby, there all the time. So I'm not saying I never heard the gospel. I probably heard it, but it wasn't until I was 16 when the preacher was preaching about how we each have sin that we deal with. And I think that was the first time that I realized that I was a sinner, that I did things that displeased God. And so that's when I gave my heart to Christ. But nobody came alongside of me and taught me how to study the Bible, how to pray, how to share the gospel. So I think discipleship is really key. But nobody did that for me. Now, I was in a Sunday school class. I was a part of the youth group. So, you would get the teaching that was there, but nobody showed me specifically how to do that for myself. So it's like I put God in a box, and I put him up in the closet, and I would get him out when I needed something, and when I didn't, I put him back in the closet. And so, yeah, I was just living like that, got involved, same drugs, alcohol, and then went to college, and then met that girl, Kim, and he told the rest of that story. So,
and we'll get to in a minute how now y'all are, super professional Christians. Y'all been on the mission field. You've done all the things, but the girl who initially discipled you, wasn't some professional.
Right.
She shared the gospel. She shared Jesus 1-to-1, and then you to your now husband, clunky, but the gospel was shared.
Yeah.
And so, for everybody listening, that's all we're asking you to do. That's all the Bible is, just share and give what you have. Discipleship, I forget who said this. I'm stealing it from somebody, but discipleship is just being one chapter ahead. You don't have to know everything.
right.
But just a little bit and deposit that into the next person.
Well, one thing I really appreciated about Campus Crusade for Christ was their emphasis on discipleship and evangelism. But as I was in a Bible study with Kim, she was our leader, and we had several girls in our group. Then, not long after that, I had not been really walking with the Lord for a very long time. I started a group. And so as Kim was pouring into me, I was pouring in what very little I knew into other girls. And so I really appreciated that. And that just showed us how important discipleship is. And, you can't take somebody further than you've been, but you can do something. And so, yeah, it's real important.
Right. And, we'll get into your call to missions in just a second, but I bet that has something to do with it. Here our mission statement is to make disciples who make disciples and for worth around the world for God's glory. And that's why I think the blessings and the happiness and the joy that Christians who don't make disciples sacrifice are huge, because that's where the good life is. That's where the exciting stuff is presenting the 4 spiritual laws. And then, so saved freshman year or so, the romance grows. You get married right after college, and then so how long after that, or how did you begin to sense a call to missions or ministry? What was that like?
Yeah. So while I was in college, so we were dating, very involved in crusade, looking for church, honestly. And Methodist background, Baptist background. We started looking. We went to lots of places. We're in a college town now, both away from home, and we're looking for how to get it because as much as I love crusade, they're weak on local church and baptism, if I'm being honest. And so I was getting convicted that I needed to be baptized. So we were looking for churches, and this is a long story short, but we ended up. She had a Baptist background, so we went to a Baptist church, and I heard a guy preach, and I was just blown away. I was like, man, that's what I think the Bible sounds like. That's what I think preaching ought to be. And he's a famous preacher. I won't name his name now, but it was his first church at that time. So anyway, got involved in that church, got baptized, and so then not long later, a friend of mine who was in Crusade said, "Hey, my home church is looking for a summer youth intern. Would you be willing to do that?" And we were staying around town, and I had started doing some. We'd have weekly meetings, Crusade on campus, and I started doing some of the preaching and speaking there. Just in teaching Bible studies and whatever. And I was just starting to do some public speaking stuff. I actually changed my major from English to English and speech communication. I double majored because I could see that I loved evangelism and I loved preaching and teaching Bible studies and stuff. And I could just sort of see God was doing that in my life. So then, took the summer youth intern job at this church called Freedom Baptist Church. So I'm in this church and doing that. And so then I like the church fine. So even after the summer, I stay there as a member. We're still dating. So we're going there as, college people, whatever. And we stay in the church. We end up getting married. That pastor marries us and we decide to stay and live in Wilmington. And she's selling toilet paper dispensers. Or actually she was working for a health for a doctor's office, I think at that time. Yeah. We were newlyweds. And I'm selling insurance door to door. Cancer insurance, door to door, cold calls in the country of North Carolina,
Amazing.
And it's a different day, different day, door to door stuff. And but I worked for this Christian, insurance company, so I'd go around and I'd knock on the door, and when I would knock on the door, if they wanted to talk about insurance, I'd sell them insurance. If not, I'd share the gospel with them. Okay. And so I was doing tons of door-to-door evangelism in my day job. Probably wasn't supposed to do that, but I was doing it anyway. and just really, just in love with God, so in love with the Word, and so in love. And I can remember I went through this season where I'd go, and I'm in the country, right? So I'd pull off my little Isuzu pickup truck, and I'd just park on a field road, and I'd just read the Bible. Yes. I was tired of knocking on doors, whatever, so I'd be reading the Bible, studying the Bible, whatever. And then it got to the point where she would go off to work, and I'd go back home, and she wouldn't know I was at home, and I'd sit there, and I'd just be reading the Bible. Yes. And I was feeling this kind of, spiritual dissatisfaction, this dryness in my life. And I just asked God, I was like, is there some sin in my life? There must be something wrong with me because I don't know what's going on. I just feel kind of discontented. The job was straight commission, right? So
Sure.
you sell or you starve. And we were doing a little bit of both of that. and I didn't have any business, staying at home. And it wasn't that it was so much sin. I didn't know what was happening. And then one day I was reading in 1 Timothy chapter 4, where basically we're young, newlyweds, not even kids yet, but where Paul tells Timothy not to let anybody look down on him because of your age, but be an example to the believers or whatever. And when I read that, it's just like a light bulb came on to me. I was like, I'm not in sin and there's nothing wrong in my life. God's actually trying to tell me something.
Okay.
And so I called my pastor that day, and he did such a great job. His name was Randy Helms, a godly man. Loved him, but I called him that day and I said, Randy, I just want you to know that this is what's happened. I think God might be actually calling me to full-time gospel ministry. And he did such a great job with that. He said, Kevin, I think you're probably right. Here's what I want you to do. On Sunday, I want you to come down at the invitation, because we give an invitation every Sunday. I want you to come down to the invitation, and I want you to make that public to the church. So I did. I did that Sunday, came down, made that public, and said, I don't know what's happening. Told them the story, just this church, maybe 200 or 300 people in there, 200 or 300 people in there, and shared the gospel shared the story of what God was doing in my life. And then said, pray for me. I don't know what that means, but I just want to make that public here in my local church. And then about 2 weeks later, the personnel committee for the church called me and said, Kevin, you're not going to realize this, but we actually have been thinking about hiring an associate pastor for the church. And we've seen your work here as a summer youth pastor. We know you. You guys have been faithful members, and we've seen God working in your life before. And we actually are looking for we want a minister of outreach and evangelism.
That's you.
Okay.
And yeah, exactly. And you think you'd be interested in that? I said yes, but let me call my wife.
Smart.
And they paid us $15,000 a year, which was not bad money in that day.
You're gonna make that
And,
every year.
That's right.
A whole year.
$15,000 a year to be on staff full time as associate pastor of evangelism and outreach. And all I did was go around and knock on doors, share the gospel, and visit people in the hospital, and occasionally preach, that kind of stuff. And but that's kind of how we got into full time ministry. Later, they ordained me, and they just, I think, handled our call and all of that really well. Did a great job. That pastor left, another pastor came. I'm speeding up a little bit. In 1991, I think, or 92, we got convicted. We needed to go to seminary. Ended up in Mid-America Seminary in Memphis, Tennessee. And I pastored across the river for 5 years in a little town called Widener, Arkansas. 1997, whole nother story. We felt like God was calling us to missions, and we went to Africa in 97. Stayed there ever since until we moved to Fort Worth in 2024.
Awesome. I was called to ministry at 16 and had an excellent pastor. Very thankful for him. So I resonate with what you say. And I would say to anybody that's listening, just like baptism, like a call to ministry, a spiritual milestone, there's something about declaring that to others and making it public. Like it's true in your heart and your life, and you own it. It's personal. It's a personal calling, a personal decision. But when you make it public, it seems like it just solidifies it. It strengthens it in some way. And so maybe somebody's listening, and you just, if you're looking for that spiritual burst, just when you get clarity from God on something, share it with somebody and do that.
So when it's time to go to Africa, how old are your kids in 97?
In 97, 5 and 2.
Okay.
And
So-
Hannah was not.
Okay,
born
Hannah,
yet.
she wasn't around yet. So was it he got the tablets on the mountain, then he comes to tell you, or did y'all begin to sense this?
Pretty much so. That's
Really?
kind of what it was like. He was going to school.
That's how it started.
That's how it started, yes. He was, like he said, he was going to seminary, and, at seminary you have different pastors come and preach during chapel, and you have visiting missionaries who come and speak in chapel or teach in classes. And so he would hear these people who served in different parts of the world, and it did not matter where they served. He would come home at the end of the day and say, I think God might be calling us to Russia, or God might be calling us to China. Well, I'd been home with these 2 little kids, and he didn't say this, but this little town had a population of, I think, 314. God used this time in our life to prepare us for the mission field, because to me, it was almost more third world than going to Zambia, because I came from a city. So anyway, when he would come home from school, I just needed help. I wanted help. He would be gone all day, and then when he would come back from school, he was still being a pastor. And so I just needed help. I didn't want to hear about that. And that went on for a while, I think. And then they offered a class where the wife could come also, and it was like one day a week.
Yeah, it was called Life on the Mission Field.
And so different missionaries spoke, and so I was able to go to that. So I think that contributed to us feeling called to go. But it was a long process. We started the process with the IMB. I told him I was willing to go. Sure, well, I can do that eventually. We got to that point. And when he contacted the IMB, they, and for a good reason, they want to make sure that you feel called to be a missionary. And I could not honestly say that I felt called. I was willing to go. I was willing to be submissive as his wife and go, but I could not say that I was called. And so the IMB very wisely said, well, then you need to wait until you're both on the same page. So we were a little disappointed But Kevin just said, well, I'll keep being a pastor and we'll live our life here. And if God directs us at another time, we'll do that. And so I don't remember how long after that? Was it a year, two?
Well, what about that long? So what happened was I graduated from seminary in '95, and it was during that 1995 year that we were talking with the IMB, and it was a red flag to them. I thought their job was to convince her to do it, to fix her. So we both went in with the candidate consultant, and I was like, so here's the deal. I feel like God's calling us to be missionaries overseas somewhere, but she doesn't think that. So, okay, there you go. Solve that problem.
Make her go.
And they were like, well, that's great. We'll see you later. Red flag. You're not ready. And that was a little bit of a surprise to me. But I was thankful for that, actually, in hindsight.
Looking back on it.
Yeah. And so I just thought, well, then that's God's answer. I'm just going to keep being a pastor. Our church was growing. It was booming. We were happy, and we weren't looking to leave. Although I will say there had been a steady stream of pulpit committees coming through, and we could tell something was coming. We just didn't know what. Yeah. And so I stayed there at that same church, my seminary church, for 2 more years until 1997. And then the IMB candidate consultant contacted us back and said, hey, Kevin, this is IMB, and we're just wondering. I don't think this happens anymore. It's old days, but they said you were interested, but the call was an issue because you were thinking about career missions, right? Well, yeah, because I've got an MDiv. I've been pastoring for so many years. In those days, you had to have a Master's of Divinity and 2 years pastoral experience for them to even send you. It's not like that anymore. And so I had all the qualifications. So we were thinking the career route. And they said, well, have you ever considered ISC, which stands for International Service Corps? It's like a 2-year one-time commitment, kind of like Journeyman, but for older people. And so I said, well, no, I hadn't thought about that. They said, well, because it's just a one-time thing, as long as you feel like God's leading you, you don't have to have the call all worked out. Right. And I was like, okay. So, well, I'll ask her about it, but she's not going to be interested, I'm sure of that. And so he said, okay. So I went and told her, I said, hey, I just want you to know the IMB called me and they said this. And what would you think about going overseas for just 2 years? And she said, I think I'd like to do that. Just kind of knocked me over with a feather. Yeah. I was just blown away. 6 months later, we were in Zambia, and I was teaching.
6 months later.
6 months later, yeah, we went through the process, and I was in Africa, and we were raising our kids, and I'm teaching in a seminary, and we were living our best life in Africa. So we came back at the end of those 2 years and had to kind of work through the whole process again for us to both get on the same page. Even after 2 years of honestly a picture perfect term in missions and in love with it, I wasn't even sure. Does God want me to be in the pastorate? What does God want me? And the will of God, I'll just say this: I'm convinced is a process. And I think that probably the most significant thing about determining God's will for your life is not so much the what as it is the when and the how. It's instead of the what, it's the when and the how. A lot of times we figure out the what before God's ready for us to actually do what he's calling us to do. And so we kind of have to sort of get with him. And what we realized in hindsight now, looking back, is that actually, God might have been using me as the head of the home to kind of say, hey, yeah, this is what we're going to do. Let's prompt whatever. But God was using her as my partner and as my teammate to sort of slow me down a little bit, And through me pushing and her pulling, we actually ended up getting to where God wanted us to be at the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And that's how God works. And so you just have to walk through that journey. It really is a journey. And honestly, I know it's a trite saying, but the journey is just as important as the destination. I'm convinced of that.
Very good.
So we were back in the States after that 2-year term for, we'd been there about 3 months, I guess. And I was in a Bible study, Breaking Free, with Beth Moore, and Kevin was doing...
Not with Beth Moore in person.
Right.
She wrote
the Bible study book.
Yeah.
And then Kevin was doing Experiencing God.
Not with Henry Blackaby, but the book he wrote.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I think that God used both of those studies that we were a part of to help call us to the mission field. Within about a week of each other, we both came to one another and said, I think this is it. I think God does want us to go back to the mission field. We were open to another part of the world. We looked at different job requests. But ultimately, God called us back to Zambia, and we were there for 19 years.
As church planners.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to hear more about the work that you did. But if I could double click on a couple things within that, because I think y'all are exempt. You mentioned head of household, Kevin. Suzie, you mentioned the word submissive. Not a heavily used word these days.
Yeah.
So, but I think that the way that you're using it is not just biblical, but it's super healthy in the way that people can understand how these crucial decisions work in our lives. Courtney and I, my wife and I, have had. Y'all are describing what happened with us for about 10 years. It's, he's coming home after hearing a great chapel speaker and dreaming, and you've been with the 2 and a 5-year-old all day just going,
help.
Can we go out to McDonald's for dinner instead of me having? So I think that is such a healthy way that y'all describe that, where she helped you slow down. He helped you see a different picture of what could be. And that's just such a healthy way that y'all, and I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but that y'all perceived your call together.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And I honestly don't think that, I think people make too much of submission because they get caught up in that word and what they think that means. But in the same way that you've got submission in the Bible, you also have, loving your wife like Christ loves the church, right? You've got that balance, and both of those require great sacrifice. Right. And if you're not doing your part, how do you expect the other one to do their part? And we don't do our part because they do our part. We do our part because it pleases God. And so regardless of how I behave as the leader, she's doing her part. She's being submissive. But regardless of whether she's submissive or not, I'm doing my part. I'm trying to be a great leader. And I'm convinced, honestly, and I've felt this way all along, because I just love her. I mean, she's my world. I mean, she's just my world. And I just want to please her. I want her to be where she thinks God wants her to be. And so I'm pretty committed that if I have to put my foot down and say, hey, this is what we're going to do, whether you agree or not, I've not been a very good leader. Yes. I've not been a very good leader. Right. Just think about that, even as a pastor, an authoritarian pastor. I mean, if you've got to command people to do things, then you've not done a very good job of casting vision and of actually convincing them that this is what God wants us to do. And so I felt like that my role as the husband was not to make her do what I thought that we should do, but to hang in there and to lead well. And if she wasn't convinced, then it means I still had work to do. It doesn't mean that, and it doesn't mean she's not being submissive or not following me. She's totally willing to do that. But I could probably honestly count on one hand the number of times I've had to say in our married life of 36 years, I think, 37 in September, of almost 37 years, when I've had to say, well, I'm convinced this is what God wants us to do. And she said, okay, I don't agree, but I trust you.
Yes.
That's probably happened, honestly, 2 or 3 times. Because if we're not on the same page, then I don't want to move forward until I feel like we're on the same page. I feel like that's what biblical leadership looks like.
That's good.
And it makes it, I want her to feel good about submission.
And, you, Kevin, are pretty convinced in 1995, let's move overseas. She's not. And it was just 2 years of seeking God's call for a lifetime of overseas ministry together. So in hindsight, we have so many young people here, and they're Rome wasn't built today because they weren't invited.
Right.
They're ready to go. They have the calling. They're ready to roll. But in just a short amount of time of gentle, loving leadership, we all can get on the same page. And at the same time, you slowing us down, Suzie, of going, okay, let's really think through, and let's really, so I think that's
because God's sovereign. God is sovereign. Yes. He's got a will for your life, and so we were doing. I was correct in what God wanted us to do. I was not correct in when He wanted us to do it.
Wow.
And so she was, or she didn't know it, but she was.
Team. You mentioned the word team.
That's right. That's right. And that's how we raised our kids, honestly. I mean, when we went to the field, I'm getting ahead of myself, but, our whole perspective in ministry was we're Team Rodgers. So, it wasn't like we told our kids, hey, you're going to go over here and you're just going to play video games and we're going to do the work. We're like, we're going as a family. We're going to do the work as a family. Sunday morning we get in our 4-wheel drive pickup truck. Thank you, Lottie Moon, for
Yes.
purchasing that. And thank you, Southern Baptist.
Shout
and
out to Lottie.
Getting that 4-wheel drive pickup truck. And I've got, my wife and me in the front seat, and we're going to drive 3 hours to go to a church, and it's going to be in the middle of nowhere, and it's not going to be in the language that our kids understand. And it's going to be
And
hard.
it's hot.
And it's going to be hot, and it's going to be, and it's going to be difficult and a long day and hard for everybody. And we got our 3 tiny little babies lined up like cordwood in the back seat of that truck. And Suzie would turn around and say, "Okay, Team Rodgers, here we go. We're going to such and such Baptist church." And so let's all say what our jobs are going to be today.
Wow.
And she'd say, "So Kevin, what's your job going to be?" I said, "Well, probably I'm going to be asked to preach. That's just, just a given. If I show up, that's what they're going to do. So I'm going to do that probably, or whatever God asked me to do." And Suzie, what are you going to do? She said, "Well, I'm going to take care of Hannah, the baby. I'm going to watch the boys. If the kids get rowdy," and she means the African kids in the church, "I'm going to take them out, and I'll teach the kids. I'm going to do this and that, And then we'd ask the kids, "So what are you going to do?" And Hannah would be in her little, maybe 3-year-old voice, "Well, I'm going to do what mommy says. I'm not going to cry or whatever,
I'm going to play with the
I'm
kids.
not going to hit my brother. I'm going to play with the kids. I'm going to do this." But everybody kind of knew these are the jobs. We're going out. We're going to do what God's called us to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's it like raising kids overseas?
It was probably very similar to what it would have been had I raised them here in America. I remember when we knew that God was calling us back to Zambia that I found out like a week later after we had contacted the IMB and said that we're ready, we're going to go back. I found out I was pregnant with Hannah. And it's like God just really, I don't know, I really got scared. I got fearful because it was one thing to go with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, but Hannah would have been born. Yes, they were boys. Sure. She was going to be born. We didn't know at that time it was going to be a girl, but she would basically be 3 months old when we went. And in Africa, there's certain sicknesses and hardships that you have to go through. And Zach had malaria. Kevin had malaria. I had not. Neither had Justin. And so it's hard to think about taking a little baby when they can't communicate what is wrong. So I was a little nervous about that, but God just confirmed in my heart that this is what God had called us just a week before, and He was going to provide for us, and He was going to take care of us. So I think that, and everything was fine. Hannah never got malaria the whole time we were in Zambia or Kenya. So it was different. It was difficult at times. We struggled probably like most parents do when we first went, thinking about the things our children were missing out on by not being raised in America. Baseball, yeah. Our oldest son was really good at t-ball, and we thought, he has a future.
He's got it.
Yes, exactly. He has a future. He could be a famous baseball player one day. Now it seems silly to have been concerned about something like that, but at the time, those were very real issues to us, and thinking about the things that they were missing out on. But oh my goodness, there was so many benefits of growing up overseas, and you could ask any of our kids, they would not trade
our kids
that
would
life
not trade it
for anything.
The world.
Yes.
Who goes on vacation, a few hours away and sees elephants and lions and whatever and everything imaginable and has those experiences? Our kids lived in rural Africa in a great place. This is the warm heart of Africa. Okay. We were in a very responsive mission field. There were lots of people wanting churches and lots. It was just kind of organic multiplication, just sort of happening, and
they were very receptive to the gospel.
Very receptive, too. And they loved us in that village, and they loved our kids, and so our kids hung out with the kids and our boys, especially with the boys in town. We had a yard worker, and his daughter was our daughter's best friend. They kind of grew up together. And our kids just had the best experiences, and they lived in, and everybody it really does take a village. Everybody looked out for them. Everybody was watching after them, and they love Africa and they love Africans, and they wouldn't change anything At the same time, too, it was really great for our family, if I'm being honest with you, because, it was just us in town. And so at night, we're at home. We weren't running to the church every night or going to do
No
all of
Wednesday
these
night
activities.
services.
And all these things that they really are, in some ways, blessings here, all these opportunities that you have. They're also time killers for families where you're constantly just, you're like the mom feels like she's the minivan driver, right? And that didn't happen there.
Right.
So at night, we're as a family, we're playing games. At night, we're all together. At night, we're watching a VCR tape that somebody sent us in the mail that took 4 months to get there or something like that.
So a VCR listener is
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's right. And it was just, no exposure to drugs for our kids. No exposure to alcohol for our kids. Can you imagine?
Wow.
It wasn't that we were in this controlled environment, but in many ways we really were. And there were other challenges our kids faced, but yeah, I think our kids are who they are for Jesus today because they grew up in Africa. And for those who are listening, if you really love your kids, the best thing you can do is go overseas with International Mission Board.
Amen.
And leave tomorrow.
Yeah.
Trust me, your kids will thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
And I think our kids have a broader worldview
Oh, very much
because
so.
they grew up overseas. They didn't just grow up in one town in America and for their whole life. So
Yeah, I feel. A missionary kid, but we were kind of
You
back and
didn't get
forth.
to be the smartest guy in the room, but without being in El Salvador, that's what happened.
Hey, so we were kind of back and forth. I recently read. I don't know if y'all have read Third Culture Kids, and it kind of messed me up because I was unaware of why I'm so different until I read much of that book. And so, so there's, but y'all did that so well. My parents did great too, did so well. And, including your kids on mission. It's not mom and dad. When we first moved here to plant a church, I heard my daughter, I'm going to not cry. My daughter told one of her friends, yeah, we're planting a church.
and that's great.
Not dad, not mom and dad, we are. And so I think y'all including your kids and everybody having a job on the way to church is awesome.
Yeah. So tell us a little more about the work of planting churches and what that looked like and what your experience was like.
Yeah. So, the first couple of years, I need to back up to tell you, but the first couple of years we were there as ISCers, I actually taught in a seminary.
Okay.
And was terrible. I'm sure did a terrible job. I didn't know the culture. I didn't know the language. I didn't know how to teach in an African context. I didn't know anything. I just basically showed up and dumped into these students what had been dumped into me at Mid-America in Memphis, Tennessee.
Right.
Like any of that, and the things that I needed to know, like spiritual warfare, how to cast out demons, how to deal with witchcraft, all that kind of stuff, I was clueless about, right? Or how to plant churches even, So what I did with those students, it was really God's gift. I mean, God's just been so gracious to us our entire life. But during the week, I'm with these students during the week, and I'm teaching them in the classroom. They all lived on campus. It was a residential campus in Lusaka, Zambia. I'm teaching these kids, these students, I say kids, they were as old as me, some of them. But I'm teaching them during the week the Bible or theological things or biblical things. And then during the weekend, I would be out with them in the surrounding area, and I'd be planting churches. This is as a seminary professor. I hadn't become a church planter yet. And so it was great because I'd teach them the Bible, and they teach me how to cast out demons. I'd teach them the Bible. They teach me how to plant churches, And so through that whole 2 years, that first 2 years, it was sort of, I think, formative for us. It equipped us to be able to know what we were going to do. So when we went back to the same country as church planters, we were actually going to a place we had been, and we had done some ministry, so we sort of knew a little bit about what we were doing. And so we went to a little town on the border with Malawi called Chapata and learned language for a year. Okay. And after language learning, we moved back to our town we were based, a little town called Chongwe, that place where our kids grew up. And basically, there had been a church planter there before me. His name was Mike Howard, a Texan, done a great job, actually. Was kind of standing on his shoulders. There was already some work going. So I just started with that group of churches and just identified. I had a map in my office. I covered an area about half the size of the state of South Carolina, 4 different people groups. And I just had a map on there, and I had a list of churches from him that he planted. The first thing I did was I just took a handheld GPS. We didn't have anything but the old Magellan or Garmin in those days. And I had guys that would go with me, And I went and mapped out all those churches and saw what was still there, what wasn't, kind of got to know the area. And then I found, as I was doing that survey work, I found churches that needed help with discipleship or help with things, just churches that were existing churches. And I started doing something called Theological Education by Extension, TEE. And there were books. Those books were in the local language. And so,
I guess kind of pioneered that in a way. That was
I think in Africa, and even in South America too, it was a big thing there. So we started doing that in the language, and of course my language skills were not necessarily where they needed to be after a year in language, but I had enough I could get started, and then doing that every week, every day, being in preparing a lesson in the language with my language helper and whatever, and then going around to all these churches and teaching that lesson. Eventually I got to the point where I could kind of do all that on my own, and that was also very helpful. And so then as the work started growing and I was helping these existing churches, they were formed in associations. I got together with those associations, and we just would talk about, so what areas need churches? Where are there not Baptist churches? And we would chart those on the map. And I would kind of strategically through the years sort of figure out with the people I worked with, where do we need to have churches? And then I would either bring volunteer teams, or I would go and show the Jesus film myself, or I would just go on my own and do evangelism or whatever. And but if you think about the missionary task, and I'll say this as concisely as I can, there are basically 6 components that I think is pretty universal. There's entry, then there's evangelism, then there's discipleship, then there's healthy church formation, leadership development, and exit to partnership. So if my name's Matt Kendrick, for instance, and I want to plant a church in, let's say, Fort Worth, Texas, okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter into that field. And entry is research, learning the language, learning the culture, learning what's effective, learning what gospel presentation works, learning where there is work, where there's not work, learning where we need to do stuff, all the stuff that a church planter would do in a place like Fort Worth or a place like Chongwei, Zambia. And then I'm engaging people and that's step 2. It's not really steps, so you're doing it all at the same time, but basically, the next phase is evangelism. As I meet people, I'm sharing the gospel. And when I meet people, I got 2 kinds of people that I meet. There's either saved people or lost people. Right. There's only 2 there are, okay? So if it's a lost person, I've got a gospel presentation that I know is contextually, culturally specific that I can actually share with that person in their heart language. And I'll bridge to the gospel, and if they get saved, then I'm going to now begin to disciple that person. If they're saved, that's right, and I find that they're a believer, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast vision for how they can join me in the work of planting a church here or spreading the kingdom of God in this area. So I'm engaging everybody I see either with the gospel or casting vision to join me in the field. And so then after entry and then evangelism, now I've got people I'm discipling those people. And that group of believers that I'm discipling is eventually going to get to the point where we can transition them and form a healthy church. And that's a whole process, and there's lots of moving parts to that. But then after that church is now meeting and they're beginning to identify themselves as a church and they're beginning to practice the 12 characteristics of a healthy church, then we are working on leadership development and developing organically, honestly, from within that congregation, who's going to be the elder and who's going to be the deacons and how that's going to work. And of course, this takes sometimes years. It can be. Right. Usually it took, where we were serving, about a year to get from entry to a church that was fully formed with leaders and where I could exit. And by exit, it's exit to partnership. I'm not abandoning them, but I'm moving to the next village. And together with them, oftentimes, they might be actually exiting into another village and that church planting a church, or I'm going with them to another village planting a church, or maybe I'm going this way and they're going that way. And but we're continuing to multiply. That's what it looked like.
So there's next fall of 2026, we're going to do a 5-week mission series, and I already have it lined out to where basically the first week you're approaching what is mission. So just put those 6 in your hat. And I think our people are going to be, what do missionaries do?
Right.
That's got to be a question they have. That's it. You map it out. You go share. You make.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I feel like we're just scratching the surface, but we've been going at this long enough.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your time. I just have such respect and admiration for you and everything that you've done to make disciples and raise a godly family. And thanks for being part of Redemption City. And I do want to say thanks to the IMB too. You mentioned a second ago The IMB is just awesome, and what I'll say but we have done through the IMB as a convention of churches it just really makes me proud. So thank you all for being tip of the spear on that. And so thanks for your time. And
Can I tell you one story?
Please, yeah.
About how classy the IMB is and why we're fans for life, even though they make us mad sometimes. Your boss does that, I think.
sure.
But when we went that first term, we came back after 2 years, and we weren't sure what God wanted us to do. Some people will do this thing called a turnaround, where they'll go for 2 years. Like our kids are probably going to do that, and they'll turn around and go back with career. And the IMB kind of, keeps you on salary and benefits during that interim 6 months when you're in that turnaround process. We didn't take that because we just weren't sure that we were going to do career. We just, at the end of those 2 years, we weren't convinced we weren't in the same place. And so we felt like because of our integrity's sake, we needed to just, resign. And we went back and this is, by the way, a shout out to just local churches in America. There was a church there that we formed a relationship with that had a mission house. And they let us stay in their mission house for 4 months. And we just basically prayed and fasted and tried to seek the Lord. God, what do you want us to do next? And it was at that church that she was taking the Bible study, the Beth Moore Bible study. I was in experiencing God. So God used that church. And we stayed with them, by the way. We moved our membership from there to here after 25 years in that church. And we just had a relationship with them. They were so kind to us through 25 years of missions and ministry. But at this time, it was our first time to be on in between terms, and we didn't know what we were doing next. And they loved on us, cared for us, and they're so great. And anyway, as we were going through that whole process, she shared this a little bit. She said that we actually finally decided, God wants us to go with the IMB. And we were not on salary and benefits with them. I was actually doing landscaping, and I think eventually was interim pastor at a church, just to kind of make ends meet while we were waiting to go back. But we had contacted the IMB and started the process, and they were like, we're waiting for you guys to call. Yeah. So we started the process, and about a week or two after having filled out the initial application, we found out that we were expecting our daughter
Wow.
Hannah. So no salary, no insurance, no nothing, okay? And except the 2 month severance that the IMB had given us in this house we were living in. So I called them up and I said, hey, guys, I just hate to tell you this. I'm really sorry, but I promise you we did not know that we were pregnant. Don't think that we're coming back just because we need health insurance for this baby's birth or whatever. Oh, no, it's fine. We don't worry about that, whatever. So then things went on. Of course, I'm doing the landscaping thing. I'm doing all the stuff I have to do as a dad to take care of this family, and Susie's getting bigger and bigger by the day. And then we actually, the way it works, you don't actually go on salary and benefits with them until after your appointment. And we had not, I don't know if this happens today, and I'm probably getting people in trouble for saying this now, but the IMB home office called us up like in October before we were even appointed. And they said, hey, Kevin, we just want to let you guys know, we know that your appointment's coming up and all this kind of stuff, and this is when your salary and benefits start. But we're going to go ahead and put you guys on salary and benefits so we can pay for the birth of your daughter.
Wonderful.
And I'm telling you, buddy, when they did that, that was like a fan for life after that. There is no, I don't say this just because we're all in this room. There is no greater denomination than the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm convinced of that. There is no greater mission sending effort than the cooperative program.
Absolutely.
And how that works for home missions, North American Mission Board, and even the International Mission Board. And there are no greater mission sending agencies than the North American Mission Board and International Mission Board. And it's a gift for us to be able to even be in a church as a part of that.
I totally agree. It makes me proud, that the IMB does that takes those burdens off of families so that y'all could just focus on what is God doing, and where is God leading. So praise God for that. Well, love y'all. Thank y'all so much for your time. Kevin and Suzie Rodgers. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.